Everything looks good. Hey, Dennis Young here. We're up to podcast number 26 already, and it's been a great series so far. And please subscribe as our fan base keeps continuing. We've got a very special guest here today, Bob Bellerue. How you doing, Bob?
I'm good. How you doing, Dennis?
Great. So you're a very unique artist out there, and we'd like to go over your story and some of the music you're doing, etc. So maybe we could start off by starting off your background when you started in music, how you what influenced you.
Well, I started playing trumpet and drums in elementary school, but kind of dropped it. Really then dug into punk rock and acid rock in high school, making mixtapes, and just became a really serious fan of just like textured music and heaviness.
Okay.
Started getting into booking shows, also playing like in junk metal drum jams in San Diego. Went to UC San Diego in the late '80s and started booking shows there, running sound for, and it was a really good time in San Diego because it was right before like the major labels discovered everything, and it's like
Okay.
Drive Like Jehu, Rocket from the Crypt, like Crossed Out, Crash Worship, all these really amazing bands that were just happening. I was just in the thick of it, and people just really like bring in their best game, to just kind of one up with with their friends, not necessarily trying to be successful. And I just kind of took that DIY vibe from there, and just it just kept
Okay.
going,
Mm,
and
right.
eventually, went to Boulder and Europa and got into Buddhism and studio recording and like theater sound and gamelan. And so all of that is like more like specific technical kind of processes,
Right.
that's structured, and then started doing Pro Tools stuff and soundtracks, doing live soundtracks in Boulder, and then moved back to
Oh,
LA,
okay.
got into Pro Tools stuff and got into like really detailed soundtrack, sound design stuff
And when was
from
that?
there.
What year was that?
So I
When
moved
was
back
that?
there in '98. Also ended up
Okay.
I was living near Venice, and I went by Beyond Baroque and discovered they had a music series. And
Oh, that's all right.
I had been
Okay.
a fan of noise music, in Boulder, but then suddenly it was like, whoa, there's shows happening right down the street, and so I just got involved with that and just was able just to see lots of events, with Damon Romero, Joe Colley, AMK, just a lot of real amazing people. And the LA scene is like full of a lot of really amazing artists, and there's like a dynamic that just like it's just immediately peer to peer, where
Mm,
there's just like
right.
as soon as you get started, you're hitting the the ceiling,
Right.
so to speak. There's no like career path, really, unless you want to go that the sickening route of getting involved with the film industry.
Right.
And so
Now can you just before we go, can you describe what noise music is? Like, is it generally just just a basic outline for the viewers out there before we head on?
sure, it's like a noise is like no is unwanted sound, right? And so you could think
Okay.
of it as just like people embracing the sound that other people don't want to hear. But a
Got
lot
it.
of it is also kind of just like a being open to, it's like a process. It's a form of discovery. You just start somewhere and you start messing around, you just start saying, what happens if I work with feedback intentionally instead of like running from.
Like randomly, right? Noise and sound, and but that you hear that you transmit into like music. Is it
Yeah,
something
you're
like that?
you're you're embracing with what comes up. And
Okay.
for me, I had an album called Amplified Discovery, and that's just like something that is my, in a way, it's a process. So just like you just start with something, you turn it up and you see what happens, and you find a way to work with it. Or
Right.
I think of it as like I'm start out like kind of creating an atmosphere, and it turns into weather patterns, and then once I kind of get a sense of how it's working, then I can like ride the waves that
Interesting.
emerge out of it.
So go back to, sorry to interrupt you. So you were talking about the Boulder and the LA scene and
Yeah, one great thing about LA, it's like there's no career path, so it's a really supportive environment, and everybody comes out to everyone else's shows. There's just a lot of support that way, and so you just get exposed to a lot of like really world class kind of musicians who are just like throwing down, having a good time with their friends. And they're not like stressed out about how much they're getting paid or where their hotel room is or
right,
whatever.
right.
Um, So, and then I ran a venue there, which just became super active for even just a couple years, but I still hear about it from now just because it
Hmm.
was like really dedicated to experimental forms. And
Oh, great.
um, then I ended up, I moved to Portland for a minute and then ended up in New York in 2008 and just been super involved in the scene out here and started a festival in 2011 called End Times.
I've heard about that. Yeah, because I know Colin Sheffield. That's how
Hmm.
I got exposed to this music. Was meeting Colin, and then did a record with him,
Hmm.
and I found your music really fantastic. So interesting. I wasn't really used in that scene, so it really was very unique.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I finally met Colin this year. He came out to the festival,
Okay.
but he's done a couple albums of mine over the years.
Yeah, I met him down in Austin. I was working for this company. I had a business trip, and it was nice to actually meet him. He's very, very involved in the whole scene, and he does some great music too.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get down there at some point. Um, and I've still never been to Austin.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a nice place. But so anyway, so some of your records here, like Half Normal, you did a while back, and was that the first record you actually recorded with this kind of music?
Let's see, around 2002, I was starting to work with feedback control using Super Collider, and I did a 3-inch CDR on AMK's label, Band
Oh,
Productions.
okay. Hmm.
And then also did an album called Threat Level Charlie, which was kind of my first big major work, so to speak,
Oh,
of, involving amplified like sheet of glass and this big piece of metal and just all this like distorted voices from like ring modulating George Bush and Osama bin Laden together. And
oh my
you
gosh,
know,
that sounds
it,
wild.
it happened and it was like something that started forming after 9/11, where I could see the kind of trajectory of the political system and the security apparatus that was
Oh yeah.
rising up. And so that was the first stuff I came out that I released. And Half Normal is just like a name I picked up along the way because at the time was working with an engineer in LA helping build studios and stuff, and I learned about patch bays, and that's just like one of the terms for the type of connection into patch bay, and thought, yeah, that kind of fits.
Right. Now you've done video installations too, right? I noticed from your bio.
Yeah, a little bit. Uh let's see. I did this one installation involving like footage of just kind of like grass being blown that is mirrored, into this form, this overlapping form that
That's neat. Okay.
continues, and clouds. And then I have this ongoing series that I'm just obsessed with, the kind of the reflections off the surface of water, the
All
pulsations, and
right.
the rhythms of the ripples and such. And so I have this giant library of all these videos, and I've used them as like, performance visuals in the past, and would like to use them someday for an installation, but haven't gotten that together
Yeah.
yet.
Now, what's your instrumentation live? What do you actually bring on stage when you do a performance?
Most of it, it's kind of the same setup I've had for years. The mixer is like the main instrument because it involves routing things,
Right.
and
I
sending
see.
and creating feedback paths, and I've got guitar pedals. I have a laptop that's running a patch on Super Collider that I've been using forever. And then it's just like microphones and contact mics, and then other kinds of speakers. I have little
Oh,
speakers
neat.
that are like this big, and I've got a guitar amp, that a practice amp, and then the PA, and so I'm ultimately I'm the instrument, I like to think of,
How
because
about
it's like
that?
I'm kind of just like everything is this finding that place in the middle where you get this you know the cross pollination that occurs when you have different feedback paths, and you start with like a
Wow.
microphone and you start adding in a contact mic that's on a piece of metal, and you end up where they're affecting each other, and you can't like accurately predict exactly what's going to happen. Something's going to happen. You just have to be nimble and kind of open to what happens. And
Now,
uh,
are you sampling these things in real time while this is all happening, or is this just um, how's that go about? Or the mic just picking up what you're playing or recording? that's
Yeah,
been recorded.
it's all live.
Oh, neat.
None of it's recorded. It's the mic is going directly to the pedals and the laptop, which laptop has got like delay lines that have LFOs, so the delay point is changing, and you get a little bit of like a kind of a Doppler effect, and so the effects, are limiting the amount of direct, painful feedback. I'm trying to
Right.
avoid that. Um, and just have it be more creative and musical as much as I can. But it's also physical positioning with things, and
Oh, wow. Okay. The
knowing,
positioning of the speakers and
yeah,
oh, how about that?
knowing how to have the mic, next to or behind,
Right.
the speakers, so you don't have that those eruptions, so to speak.
And how long do these how long do the shows run? You run an hour show, or how long do you usually play with this kind of?
It varies. It's actually more like 20 or 30 minutes.
Okay.
It used to be like with the Threat Level Charlie piece, that was more like a 45-minute set, with a truckload of equipment that I played by
Wow.
myself. It was just lots of stuff. And then, gotten shorter, much shorter than I am now. And then now ended up more around 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the environment.
I didn't realize there's such a niche audience for this too. I mean, Colin was telling me you had a good crowd at this festival. It was really well attended.
Yeah. There's a lot of people out there. I mean, noise has become kind of mainstream, at least elements of it. You see techniques of feedback and extreme processing, and the kind of thick textures and such, but being used in modern musical forms. And there's just more equipment available to do
Right.
stuff. It used to be a lot more complicated to do anything, especially synth music. And now it's
Oh,
just becoming
sure.
like there's just a lot more options, a lot more examples, a lot more people doing stuff. You don't need to get a whole band together and like
Doesn't sound like it. No.
convince somebody to pay for a hall and a bunch of tape stock and all that. Nowadays you can just like record all this shit at home, and the mixer I use is actually got multi-track USB connections, so I can record everything
Oh, nice.
myself, and it's just like better quality than when I'm just using a Zoom direct, and so it's just kind of a lot of circumstances have really changed
I'm sure.
when we got started.
What about the musicians you played with? I see Christian Ron, Francisco Morano. Well, these John Duncan, you've associated with some really good records with them. How do you meet up with these people? They contact you, and then you guys do you do this at separate studios, and then you mix it together? How does that work when you're
It,
working with another artist?
it varies, but usually the core of it is we record together. But then depending on the circumstance, sometimes one or the other of us will be editing it or mixing it. And with John, we recorded in my living room. It was just electronics and voice.
Oh,
And then
wow.
I took it to my work at Pioneer Works, big hall with the big PA, and I was doing some reamping in there just to add some kind of like actual kind of room sound to it. And
Hmm.
then along the way recorded some other parts and kind of did more like kind of like tracking, which is not what I normally do.
Right.
But I felt like the music it really worked for that. But it just varies depending on
Yeah,
who's motivated to run with it.
it must be nice to do it like live with another person instead of trying to do it recorded and then send the tracks to you. And maybe that could work too, though, if you guys are in tune with each other. It depends on musicians, I think. But in any kind of music,
Yeah,
really.
it's kind of weird. It can be weird, I think, recording separately because you get all these different characteristics depending on how you're recording that, and the timing is all off. But my best experience with the remote kind of thing was in the thick of the pandemic. There was a live stream that some people set up, and
Okay.
the software Reaper that I use for recording and editing, it has a server feature. You can set up a remote server so that you can connect remote people to it and it has
Oh, okay.
the ability to actually try to maintain using a metronome that you don't hear in the final result, so that people can stay in sync, and you can just
Okay.
dial in your monitors to listen to more or less of the other person. And so even if we're a little bit off from each other technically, if like someone was up in the sky looking at us,
Right.
hearing where we were actually at, in the moment you just hear the music coming in and you respond to it, and then they hear you and respond to that. And that really worked well. It was like I did a duo with Denishta Rivero, and then a quartet. Who else was on that? Dang it, I can't remember who else was on that, but so that really worked, because then it's an actual live experience.
Right. Right.
I've also
Oh,
done some recordings. I'm an audio engineer, and I worked a lot with
okay.
Lauren Connors, the guitarist, and we've done sessions in this room,
Oh,
and
wow.
we've had live stream or remote recording sessions. So they basically, we can record in the room, and I record the Zoom sound, and then the other person also records it and sends it to me,
Oh, neat. Now,
so that I can sync it
do you
up.
work, do you work as an engineer at a studio, or just people send you tracks to mix and record? How does that work for you? Do you have a studio you go to do the engineering?
I mostly, work from home, but I mean, I have a main job with Pioneer Works. I'm a technical director, and so
Oh, wow,
I
very neat.
run an event and exhibition space. And so I have a long background in audio engineering, but it's mostly live. But I've always kind of tried to push the ability to like add like good quality recordings, just as to benefit the artist, to have like documentation that doesn't suck.
Right.
Um, and then but I have my own, practice of recording and mixing and mastering and stuff here.
So I had a really good guest, Mark Dan. He's from New York, and he's a recording engineer, and he's done like over 230 uh, albums and things. So I'm gonna probably do another session with him about mastering, because he does a lot of mastering. He's based out of New York, but he came from like the folk scene,
Mhm.
and now he's been ready into rock and all types of other different formats.
Cool.
So that's pretty neat. So what's your current records that you have out? Is there that the people out there can get a hold of, and then so I want to put links on at the end where they could find your music.
Cool. Thanks. Well, the John Duncan one's most recent album that came out, Blinding Turbulence. And I'm in the middle of working on, I have a project with Katie Porter called Eternities, bass clarinet and feedback electronics. And we've been touring a lot and recording over the last year and a half. So we've got some shows coming up in July, and actually June 1st, I think we have a show in New York. So we have
Okay.
recordings we're trying to get out and working with some labels. And then the album with Francisco Marino just came out a couple months ago. Also, that was recorded in Switzerland in like 2016, I think.
Okay.
And also, just like Francisco just really did an amazing job tuning that and cutting it together. Um, and
Are
then I
you
have a
going to do anything more with Elevator Bath? Are you going to do any more records with Colin?
sure, Colin, give me a call. No,
There you go.
I'd love to. Yeah, he's great to work with. I also have a solo tape I self-released called "Recorded on Stolen Land" that
Okay.
I've still got copies of. But I also have some solo recordings, just trying to figure out, because it's in the past I was churning out. I think when I got started, and especially just in the noise scene, there's a real prolific kind of release ethic, and people are just putting stuff out nonstop. I used to
Right.
joke that if you're at a show with 20 people, you might have 30 bands or projects in the room and like 10 record labels,
Wow.
because just people are just putting out
Too
nonstop,
much.
which is great. But it also, after a while, and every time I move and I have to go through purge from my collection, I'm like, okay, well, I just worry that every time I release something, it's going to end up in the landfill. So I'm
Right.
trying to,
Right.
and I'm trying to be more specific and intentional about what's being released, and what labels or who's putting it out, but also just like really feeling good about just the live experience, that having
Right. Right.
experience of sound, because like recording noise and it's really tricky how to do
I'm
it right,
sure it
to
is.
convey it,
You get it right.
because it'll, you know, you just hear some albums that just kind of sound like poop. They don't
Right,
really
right. And then
convey
right,
that feeling. And then other ones are amazing.
you're right. I'm
It
sure.
so it just, I'm trying to be really more intentional about it, and I'm also busy. I got a life,
That's
I
great. Yeah, you are busy now. Um, so you're now. What about feedback? How do you deal with feedback in these shows? Because that's always a good or bad thing. Because I've noticed mics get fed back. It's can be. How do you deal with that?
just embrace it, baby.
Brace it right. There you go.
I
But
mean, the thing is, like, going into it, knowing kind of what you have to face. I've definitely had gigs that were out of control feedback, and I'm like, what's going on? Oh
yeah,
my
that's right.
God, and then you figure out like how to avoid it. And for me, I always try to be behind the line of PA speakers,
There you
because
go.
that
That's
just
true.
gives me more
Yeah,
control over it.
yeah.
And then just, for sound check, I don't do really lengthy sound checks, but I definitely just make sure that I've got, a good working range of things, and that I know where certain mics are landing as soon as if I use them, if they immediately start to feedback, if they're out of control or whatever. But
Right.
it's also, sound checks are tricky because the acoustics of the room change a lot when you get a room full of people. And so I don't know, a lot of it is just like a living experience that I just have to like dial in the moment. So but that's definitely part of it, is just knowing what is gonna feedback, and then just kind of how to, be cautious or prepared for how to respond. Because sometimes you can have these little bursts of things that are, extreme, and then you can just, like, pivot. You can turn it
Bring it
down,
back.
you can run it through
Right.
a different patch, processing. But I get a lot of, just out of just the physical position of, like, the microphone. If this is my mic and I've got
Right.
a speaker, and if I, depending on the relationship between it, you just get a different result.
I'm
um
sure. 'Cause you know what you've worked with it so long. You know how to get the sound. Now, have you worked with Alan Jones at all? Al Jones, do you know
I
him?
don't know how. Yeah.
Alan has done a lot of mastering for some of the people I work with. He mastered the record I did with Colin. He does a lot of noise
Hmm.
music, and he's based out of the Colorado area.
Okay.
That's where I found him for that. Now, as far as the records you put out, do you basically sell them at the shows? Do you have a market for them? Like, do you put them out vinyl mostly, or cassette?
I sell them if I can.
That's it.
And I love giving away and trading too, because
That's a good
I don't know, I
idea.
got a job. I don't, like, need it for the money. I don't want to, like, hemorrhage money, but I just really want people to
Yeah,
actually listen to it, and
right.
actually people who pay for things tend to be the ones who are really invested in listening to it. So but I self-release, and I've had other labels do it. I sell it at shows, sometimes online, and but I'm not
Yeah.
like one of those big sellers,
I've been one and done with record labels, so indie labels. They'll put out a record and then that's it. I mean, they'll move on. So, but I haven't really. Since I don't play a lot live anymore. I put everything out mostly digitally. But I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe you should have a physical product available. I'm trying to weigh that for future records. What's
It's
your opinion
tricky
on that?
because, vinyl is king in the
Right.
US. A lot of places love vinyl, but especially in the US, there's just definitely this fetish around it.
Yep.
And I don't know, I mean, that's great. Go for it if you like that. But personally, I like CDs a lot. And I'm really into the CD renaissance that has
I
occurred,
think it's
I think,
coming back. That's what I heard.
since the pandemic. There's a lot of, like, CD labels that are blowing up, and I like the format, I like the quality of the sound, and I like the cost that's involved with it as a producer.
Right. That too.
And, like, in the vinyl, there's just less and less record plants, and trying to get something in a reasonable amount of time is just
Oh, I
impossible.
know. I know. I went through that
So
during the pandemic. I put out a vinyl record, and it just took forever
yeah,
to get the plating done, and then one of those factories closed, so it took forever. And then
yeah,
by the
there's that.
time I had it, the distributor wasn't interested anymore, so it kind
Yeah,
of ruined the whole thing.
It's wild. Like I've always felt like this, no matter what format. You know, you finish an album and you like send it off,
Right, right,
like it's a burning pyre across the lake, across the ocean, and
right.
eventually
You're
it
right.
comes back to you, and you listen to it, and you're like, "This is what I worked on." Like you know,
Yeah.
it's translated by it. It's the same technically, but it's time has changed it. You know, and the
Right, you're
format.
right. And I come back and all those songs I worked so hard on, those mixes when you're involved in a
Mm-hmm.
record, every little nuance is,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden a year later, it's like, why did I kill myself? It sounds good.
I've,
You
I've
know,
been through that so many times, like
oh, I have
obsessing
too.
over every fucking
I
little
have.
detail.
Yep.
And then you can suck the living vitality out of it by making it too perfect. You know, it
Right. That's
becomes like,
true.
you know,
You're
if
right.
you get in, and especially with Pro Tools and all the like, you know, digital editing tools that we've got, it's like you take out everything that at the moment feels like, you know, it's not quite right or it's an imperfection, but then later you listen to it and it's just like it's just too shiny and clean. It's like putting
Right.
Vaseline on your teeth, you know.
Yeah,
It's
it's true. That's
it's
funny.
just
Yeah, you're right. But that's what we do as artists, musicians. This is our little babies. We bring this music to life, and then we worry about it if it's right, and in the long run, it doesn't really matter as long as it sounds good. Everybody enjoys it, and that's the way it goes.
Yeah, it's tricky. We're not always the best, like, you know, critics and judges about how good something is. And I've like long had this kind of perspective on my live sets where I used to have an emotional response after I played. I'd be like, "That was really great. Everyone seemed to like it. Oh my God, that's gonna be great. I can't wait to listen to it."
Right.
Because I obsessively just record everything I do just to have material, you know,
No,
to
that makes
work
sense.
from. But then often in those cases, I listen to it and I go like, this is what people all thought was so great. It's kind of boring. And then other times I'd play a set and be like, oh, it didn't do very well. The thing I went to boom and it didn't go to boom boom. So
Right.
oh,
Right.
that's too bad. And no one said anything. And then like 6 months later, I'll listen to the recording being like, I guess I'll give it a shot. And then I'll be like, wow, this actually has a different kind of flow to it. And this is just sounds really different, the other stuff I do. So I kind of realized that, you know, there's an imperfect maxim out there, which is good gigs like often don't
Right.
make good recordings, and bad gigs sometimes make the best recordings.
Well,
um,
that's what I found with Liquid when I played with them. Same thing, the show everybody thought was really good, and we'd be pouting, "Oh, this set stunk. We didn't do good. We didn't play good." Well, one show was really weird where we had we were playing at this place called the Underground in New York, and our bass player busted a string, and he didn't have an extra string. And in those days, in New York, you could go to a music store at night
mm-hmm,
and it was still open. But there we were, great set, and boom, and it was a great set. We came back and we didn't feel it, and people thought it was great, but we just after that the set was in our mind stunk.
mm-hmm.
It's the way it goes.
Yeah,
But now, if you could send me your links after this here, that'd be great, and I'll post it on YouTube.
sure,
I'll put it in the description.
cool.
So, one last question: what do you think of like music going forward with this AI and all this artificial intelligence? You think that's gonna uh, make an impact for younger generation coming up?
I mean, one thing I've been seeing, I've done some teaching recently, and I feel like there's been some challenges of younger people just dealing with like tangible reality. You know, it's like everyone's in their devices and their
Right. I
tablets or
noticed
touch
that.
screen, and so like cables, it's like everyone has a power cable. They keep, you know, you got to charge stuff, but in terms of like plugging something in and turning a knob to turn it up, you know, it's you don't always have that familiarity that we all did, I think,
That's
growing up.
true. You're right.
And but I think, you know, what I heard was like the scariest thing. Somebody said that they said the algorithm won because they said to some kid like, "What kind of music you like?" And he said, "Oh, I like classic rock." And like, "Oh, like what kind of bands?" And he's like, "You know, classic rock." Like, and that was the name on the playlist that
Oh
they
yeah, like
would
the
listen to.
Spotify list. Yeah, I understand.
And I'm really pushing with my son. He's really into certain, you know, music and pop and whatever, and he'll be into a certain band, and I'll be like, let's find an album, let's play the album from the beginning, because then
Right.
we hear the context of what the musicians are making, and how they ordered it, you know,
Right.
and they
That's
created a
another thing.
flow. and I feel like the flow is something that's going to be like taken over by the algorithm. Algorithm is going to create the flow, and it's going to get away from individual, living bloody hands. Um, and so I worry about that. Also, the money flow is just really messed up the
Oh, it
way
is.
with
I agree with that.
streaming. I've seen artists complaining like the streaming platforms need to get their shit together and pay people fair, which is true, but it's also like it's consumers. It's just so
Right.
easy as a consumer just to go click on a link
Connect.
and it just
Right.
plays forever, and you pay a very low monthly fee, and you're making the corporation rich and not the artist, and
Right. And then I think people go to one song to the next really quick too. Maybe they don't give a chance to listen to a whole record. That we worked hard to put a lineup together of songs. I've always done that, but
yeah, totally.
this is what happens. They'll click to it's so easy on that phone to just go next song, next song, next song.
Yeah, and you
Oh,
stop paying attention. Also, I
right.
remember seeing I don't know, 6 months ago, one of the first things that came out, somebody had gone to Chat GPT and said, "Please make a conversation between Alvin Lucier and Jimi Hendrix," and it
How
was
about
this
that?
entertaining, just kind of novelty, just to
Right.
see the more like formal kind of loose academic speech of Lucier, and then the like very loose kind of stony, tripped out speech of Hendrix. And I wonder about like if you could, at some point we'll be starting to go to these algorithms and saying, I want to hear an album created by Alvin Lucier and Jimi Hendrix and
Oh, and
what
that's
might
right.
come up
I
with,
wouldn't doubt it.
which would just be absurd. But in the long run, I think you're definitely going to start seeing soundtracks and music that's just going to be algorithmic, that people are just
See, that's the
like
thing. You're
not
not
having to pay a fee to any
right.
artist,
Oh,
or
it's so easy now.
the
Cool.
programmer's the artist.
Right, right. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. The next, I think it's happening so quick. They're developing this technology so fast. The next 3 or 4 years, 5 years are going to be really very
It's gonna be weird. So
unusual to see what
that's why
happens.
we got to get together in real life and just have real experiences, and
Right,
not be like in our cubicles and in our earbuds, and we got to like be together and keep
exactly,
living, because that's never going to go away. Like chaos is never going to go away. There's always going to be glitches. There's always going to be you know human frailty and functionality,
exactly.
and stuff,
Right.
stubbing toes, and you got to embrace that shit.
But so, well, this has been really great, Bob. I'm glad you came on. And it's great to hear your story and your music. And there's definitely a pioneer in this type of noise music. And I hope you keep going forward and keep putting out records.
Thanks, Dennis. It's glad to
And
be on
then
here.
just send over some of the links
Mhm.
and your live shows where you're playing, and I'll put it on your site and for the podcast, and we'll go forward.
Great. Sounds good.
Okay, nice talking to you.
Yeah, you too.
Take care. Bye
Have a
bye
good
now.
one.
See you. We'll try.